You may be seated. Today we're going to continue on a little bit on our theme that we started last week on stress. We're going to continue that theme, and we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about money today. Stress is something that really is common to all of us, and stress in regards to money is very common to all of us these days. Stress from money in marriage is number one. It's the number one argument that occurs in marriages is about money. That's the first and primary thing that people argue about, above and over everything else. Also, it's also part of the reasons for divorce, and it's also parts of reasons why people get married in the first place. The benefits, from those who have business arrangements for their marriages, because it saves them in taxes, it saves them in insurance, it saves them in all that sort of thing. But it's also a big source of stress, because you have to agree on how to use your money. Agree on the use of the money and the priority that the money has in your life. 1 Timothy 6 is where we're going to begin, if you want to join with me there. 6:6 is our key verse for tonight. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. That is the goal that Paul gives to Timothy to give to the people of his church. And especially in this first section, he's talking specifically to the poor. To the poor in the church. To the slaves. Talking to the poor. But godliness with contentment is great gain. We want to be content with what we have. And we want to glorify God. Remember last week we were talking about you can either stress about money, or you can strive to serve God and trust Him. And by striving to serve God, you're striving for godliness. And when you strive in that, it needs to come with contentment. And when you have that contentment, it is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. This is going a little bit beyond where Jesus was talking about last week. Because last week, remember, it was people who were worrying about their food and their clothes. What they will eat, what they will drink, what they will wear. This is Paul saying, you already have that stuff. That's taken care of. For your church, for your people, that stuff is taken care of. That stuff isn't the burden. It's the extra stuff they're thinking about. The other stuff they can get with their money. The other stuff they can get. They want to get as much as they can. He's saying be content in your godliness. Be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. That is the American dream, to go from these people. That's the dream, to go from rags to riches. To go from as little as possible to having as much as possible and gaining the whole world. The classic example of the American dream comes from James D. Rockefeller. He started out with virtually nothing. His dad was known as a vagabond, and he had very little to start his life out with. But he became what has been and has since been the richest man in America. The richest man ever. He went from nothing to having everything. He was the owner of Standard Oil. And he gained a great fortune. He gained a great fortune. And throughout his career, he worked and he worked and he worked to get as much money as he could and to be as successful as he could. That was the American dream, but the American dream can become the American nightmare. Because along the way, as you try to get as much as you can, oftentimes compromises are made. The first compromise is that the priorities are switched around, just like we talked about last week with cognitive dissonance. The idea that occurs then, instead of God being first, the money becomes first, and the way to get the money becomes first. And so what happens is that somebody will work longer hours. Work will come before both God and family. Work becomes the top priority because you want to try to get as much as you can, and you work harder, and you work harder, and you work harder to try to get as much as you can. And oftentimes, too, what happens there is too much stress builds up from that. And then your life gets shorter and shorter and shorter. When you compromise for that, you talk to your family, you tell God, God, an hour, that's just too long. I can't give you an hour. You want an hour and a half? That's too long. I've got to work. I've got to make money. You tell your family, I don't know if I can be home by 6, maybe 7:30, maybe 8, maybe 9. Pushing away that priority, that's compromise. Instead of giving the time you can to God and to your family, it goes to work. Another means of compromise goes a little bit farther along. The next verse says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. One way that some people have found themselves to make a little bit extra money is to look the other way. To look the other way when something's not quite going right at work. To not to report something. Or even getting paid off. We've all heard about the stories of places that have dumped toxic waste into riverbeds, affecting whole communities, and they're given a little payoff. They look the other way. It's for a quick buck.